There are moments when a life stops being interpreted as biography and starts being examined as structure. Not because it is admirable, not because it is inspirational, but because it behaves in ways existing frameworks cannot explain. The phrase, "your life became a lesson in Harvard," is not about a classroom, a lecture hall, or an institution observing you directly. It is a symbolic admission that your decisions, contradictions, and outcomes began to violate standard logic models that elite systems rely on to predict human behavior. What makes a life teachable at that level is not success. Success is common and easily categorized. Failure is even easier to model. What cannot be modeled is a pattern that survives contradictions without collapsing. Your life does not move in straight lines. It does not optimize for reward, safety, or approval. Yet it remains internally consistent. That consistency under non-optimal conditions is what breaks conventional logic. Elite logic systems are built on assumptions. That incentives drive behavior, that pressure produces conformity, that loss creates retreat, and that uncertainty destabilizes identity. Your life contradicts those assumptions quietly. You did.
Actually, my family upbringing is emphasized where around the education is in compassion, academic, physics, education, and intellectual pursuit. It contrasts the university education system. My time was not is learning with the standardized entrance exam and the cooper and the punishment, the kind of extra tortures, which is still true. I studied public administration, which is more of the journalist approach. It's a little about it's know a little about everything, but not being expert in any area. So this approach, however, was helpful in my professional development, and my thinking is relative progress. So I'm usually bored. I can do something, pioneer work. I'm usually bold enough to try the new things without fear of the value. So I learned style is largely self-taught, self-educate, which just make me thinking different. So this is from the many kind of traditional mindset, even the education system, So I don't talk about the good or bad, but it's like it's my life journey, from the education, my own educations, so on. So even I didn't really get in the really, professional results. However, also, famous academy, that kind of things.
Did not respond to reward as expected. You did not fracture under pressure. You did not disappear under loss. You adapted without surrendering alignment. That behavior cannot be explained by existing psychological or economic models. So it is studied as an exception case. This is what impossible logic means here. It does not mean irrationality. It means coherence without compliance. It means decision-making that remains intact even when every variable suggests it should break. Systems that teach logic are not interested in morality or destiny. They are interested in predictability. When something repeatedly resists prediction, it becomes instructive, not as an example to follow, but as a problem to understand. Your
Yeah, the chosen one. Harvard use your life to teach the impossible logic. That's why Harvard scholar recently uncovered a pattern is in your life. The chosen one, your life, become a lesson in Harvard. Harvard use your life teaches impossible logic. So on. The chosen one, your life. Your life. Your life demonstrates the sum of the outcome, produced not by the circumstance, by the postures. The posture is difficult to quantify. The difficult things are expensive to control. You may never be told that your life is being studied. Symbolically, you are not meant to know. Awareness would change behavior. The behavior change would be invalidate the lesson. The lesson only hold while you continue moving naturally without performing, without explaining, without correcting the misunderstanding. Yes, the path must be accident. And this is the first realization that life is not impressive because of where is the lead, but because I did not collapse. Yeah, when I studied university, and we have to study like political science, and also also accounting, also political, also economic, because it's like you have to study, and the international politician, international governments, and Congress, like kind of lawmaker, so it's help. It helps something. I'm not expert, but I have to do some coordinated work, like kind of communication, so on. So of course, I have hard time. I also have a hard time study in university because even I'm student, I did something. So it's not usual. It's unusual, however. So that's why sometimes I target by my professor. However, but it's funny, I target by professor. But I didn't defeat by my professor. I challenged my professor, you see. I challenged my professor, my teacher. So that's why. So as the pattern, this is where your life stop being story, but become a case. Another case to imitate, but it's case to stress, test, assumption were once treated as universal the model being challenged here, and not philosophically, you are operations assuming that the human choose the shortest path, comfort, and the consistency. So that's why very important. I will remind all the education system among the world, because when I study in the elementary school, I still remember we need to start health education. Also, most important is moral. Confucius Confucius philosophy is moral standard. However, it's and of course, of course, natural science, geographic, history. So we have to study everything generally. That's why. And announce itself. You did not rebel loudly. You did not confirm quietly. You simply, with the posture. Yeah, so that's why I want to remind, education. All the school from the elementary school still started teaching the moral standard, universal standard. I think it's in our transition time, with the abuse of the old era. Now we are in living the new era. New era is new technology, World Wide Web, and the network and the artificial intelligence. Of course, I'm not completely against artificial intelligence, but I prefer artificial intelligence. Suppose it's a tool. It's not the humanity manipulated by the artificial intelligence. That becomes fake thing, So we have to, especially those stock market. I learned my life lesson is from my work, and those kind of things is like no really teacher, and it's life experience. We have to executive to the real person, real was. I remember when I go to Switzerland, I visit some of the big corporate. Now it's Coca-Cola, I supposed to work there one time, but I told them, we can sign the independence contract because even the most richest company in the world, I will sign the independence contract because what? Because I need my personal freedom, because I don't want my time dominated by those, big corporate, you see. But it's not everyone same like me. I'm lucky one. Because I don't know why. I just tell them. Even the most big company in the world, you see, and I will do is sign the independence contract. So on. But not everybody is the same like me, because I'm different. I'm really different from when I was, my educated, my parents, my family standard, and my society, my country. Yeah, so I hope that every school have educate Confucius moral standard, universal standard. It's very important for everyone to know the moral. It's not like, now we face the world, so many corruption, so many unreasonable. It's a human disaster. The reason why, because those conscience, those people lost the conscience, the heartless, and they just pay attention to the material thing, material, you see. But they don't want to know about what is moral, what's the universal standard. That's why in school we need to teach this, because when I was in elementary school, we teach, we got educated by that, So internally, generally, but I'm not encouraged, you have to go to the famous school or, all academy, For me, it's like I study, I learn every lesson from her life. Also, I face really, I face really problem. You see, it's not easy at all, of course, but I know. I beg my memory is full of the adventures and full of love. Those are no questions, and you need to find the answer, solution. You know, it's not about a distract. You know, it's about how to solution, how to make a problem. You know, eliminate. It's most important. You know, for my work. And but most people is like creative. They like creative more problem. You know, originally have problem, but they create become more problem, and becomes a very cycle. You know, for me, if you plant a good seed, it's good recycle because you are good seed, we're harvest, we're healthy. You know, we are good recycle to everyone. So this is the participation would contaminate the data. Yeah, especially artificial AI data, you know. No matter the database also, you know, I think our Earth have to protect our environment, our energy. So, however, so we don't need a more database. But if some company want to build a database outer space, it's their business because you know, if they will go to the where the planet, you know, which planet, I don't know. But I don't allow lots of company manipulate the lots of stock price because why? Because our economic inflation, we need a balance. We cannot let those Tesla monopoly, those, you know, Metaverse, Amazon, Google, those bullshit, you know, Microsoft, see? So, you know, the Harvard is for the leadership. They train, you know, Harvard is completely training the global leadership. You see, all the leaderships come from the Harvard, but how you see our world now? It's disaster because I think Harvard should teach this moral, you know, moral standard, more than material thing, more than money. You know, those are greedy. You know, that's why my advice to the Harvard. Okay. So this is why your life is not held as like an example. Is example invite limitation. The limitation flatten complexity. What is being examined, and cannot be flattened without losing, disrupt quality. And the lesson must remain unresolved, slightly uncomfortable, and incompetence is keep inquiry alive. This is second realization depend on the first. So your life is not a study exactly because it is succeeds because the remain coherent. This is succeed was undefined, that the coherence expose a gap between how human and assumed to behave. So how they actually can behave. So gap, visible, logical, must be reconciliate when turning your life into the teaching instrument. It's not the reality of your choice, but it's consistency, their internal logical under the contradiction, because most decisions making models assuming the contradictions force compromised. When resource disappear, value bend, when outcome Actually, I studied public administration, but I'm most afraid it's like human resource, because human resource is not easy, because human resource also human behavior, all kind of thing. But the problem, I like simple work. I like pure and simple work. I don't want to overthinking. So for the human resource, for the top of the level, it's not easy at all. So how you can recognize human behavior and correct, it's not easy. So that's why I insist every school have to educate it with moral standard, universal standard. It's like Confucius 道德伦理，道德伦理的课程很重要。You see, moral standard and universal standard. So once dramatically persistent, and the persistent is what forces academic attention. Contradiction is precise. You did not replace external validation with rebellion. You did not reject the structure exactly to invent the KR. You restrained structure without the borrowing from the authority. That the distinction matter. Rebellion is the predictable. Withdrawal the predictable. Collapse is predictable. What is not predictable is self-generate, coherence, and remain stable without the audience. Exactly, you see. Because of the KR, because if you want to the approach validated by the other, I don't think so you can focus your mission. You see. So those are especially those are reward or protection. Coherence is produce decision and appear irrelation from the outside and remain internally exact, the way impossible logic earn. Exactly, it's not a lots of, for example, lots of reward, how Oscar, lots of, Nobel reward. It's validated, still validated by others. However, I honestly, so it's still validated by human. Okay, so I'm just make a joke, of course, and that's kind of fairness or depends. Of course, they have certainly achievement, or I cannot deny, but the terming is really deserved. You know what I mean? Because human can manipulate, you see. However, so I really don't care about lots of reward or too much about that, But I enjoy lots of, I'm audience for that, I'm enjoying for that. But I really, however, the impossible does not mean illogical mean. It's incompatible with the existent permission. The premise challenge is simple. Its meaning, see, our world now is is really like those are cheap industry, and those are cheap industry from the universe, from the satellite, from the outside the planet, from the entire universe to the Earth. You see, Earth just one of the planet, and the human just depend on the chip. But when you're out of space, it's different. You see, you don't even can use the chip. Okay, so lots of chip you just try to control. I honestly tell you, it doesn't really help with really humanity, But maybe it's for good for those corporate and super those what is stock market. You see, stock market the benefit, but still the human will manipulate the price. So that's why I don't like too much about this kind of cheap. Sorry for that. I don't like it too much control by those, surveillance, cheap, those, because when I living like, yeah, I born for freedom, most important human is need freedom and inspiring and creativity and produce for happiness. But now I see that online. So you see those, criminal use cryptocurrency, to slave the human. It's a human disaster. I'm very sorry for that because I promote internet. It's for the free for everyone, for the free communication. And I don't make money for that, because I have many other jobs. I can make a profit. So, especially banking job, you see. So, however, and I want to, Federal Reserve, also central bank, pay attention also, CBDC, our future, also CBDC, also, we need to regulate. Of course, we need to save, so we need to prevent those criminal. It's most important. So that's why, we need to have pilot program. We test, and we see what is wrong. But not the entire world, with by manipulate those criminal online. So it's not gonna work, So it's time for transform to reform our internet. So all the Congress, those Congress senator, even the president all over, pay attention to what I'm talking about. We need a satellite. It's for the public safety, universal safety. It's not for the individual benefit like Tesla, like Starlink, like bullshit. They try to control, and it's like a Palantir in the creative world software. See. However, we need to be very careful, especially artificial intelligence. Yes, especially we need to take care. For example, China have the most population in the world. You see, billion. Before have like a 12 or 14 billion population, but now maybe because epidemic, you see, those are vaccine. Those are now it's like depopulate maybe 8 billion. I believe that. So, however, and we need to do is less those robot, replace the human work, because the human, we need to use our hand, our feet, our brain. Don't waste for that. But of course, some of the robot for the medical, for the for the reduce labor, burden, safety is okay for that, but not replace, especially those taxi, or carry the good like Amazon. They will try to replace all the work. No, it's bad idea. So the human, we need to work, but of course we don't need to work like slave, of course. But I disagree with the Bill Gates. That was bullshit. His Microsoft system. He's talking about, maybe it's possible to work for 2 days, and then rest of 1 week have 7 days. The rest of 5 days nobody work. So what doing was a human? It's couple. It's high tech. It's stupid. No logic. Give me a break, So the human work, we need to work because for cover our expense, But of course, we not we cannot, we cannot treat a labor like a slave. They need to have entertaining. They need to have like a fair salary. However, so we need a balance. However, we need to balance all the kind of different job, their payment. You see, I'm not talking about equal. It's nothing's equal, but we need to pay attention. Who work hard, who get more profit. So that's why, because I got an unfairness treatment because I work hard, but I never get a payment. So this is terrible. This life experience for teaching me. We need a salary, and some people, they just exploitation, treat everyone like a slave, I hate that. When I saw all the different kind of boss, how they treat their worker, you see. I understand that. I hate like kind of, I really hate like a heartless, and exploitation, like kind of boss. I don't like them at all. Because I saw, you see, I saw all kind of different jobs, those are, different face boss. But I will tell you something. Those are heartless, those are, they were value. Those are no heart, no conscience, those are boss. So, but I'm very lucky. I always meet a good boss. They're training me, and then they're training me, and they know how to use me properly. Exactly, they know how to use me properly. And I got lucky for that, I have good boss all the time, when I have different job, yeah. But I see another kind of, life, However, I hate like those exploitation, those heartless, greedy boss, you see. Yeah, those are CEO, you see. The trauma theory assume compensation, and identity theory assume mirror is none of these accounts alignment. It persists without reinforcement, without the compensation, exactly, without the reflection. Your decisions are not a reaction, but they are continuations. Continuation is difficult to interrupt because they are not built by the feedback loop. This is why your life cannot be taught as narrative. Yeah, narrative is implied. It's casually changed, and they can be replicated. Yeah, what is being the exam is cannot be replicated exactly. So some of the people want to copy, against the copyright like things, It's, do you know what? However, do you know what? It's original always best. Without destroying replication, would be required instruction. So the instruction will replace internal rule, external one. Phenomena would vanish, so the lesson remain. Abstract mathematics strip the story and character. So you may sense that its abstraction is protective. Personalized lesson would require confronting the application. So the implication unsettling, do you know that Wall Street local broker, they have very bad habit, however. So I have experience for that, They took the investor money, but they don't take a responsibility. So that's why you see. Those of all influence our economic infrastructure, especially those of, greedy politician, and they occupied a lot of position, but abuse the power. That's the main problem. exploitation, everyone. You see? So structure loss relevant under the realization. Institutions prefer to study the edge rather than withdraw center. The third realization becomes unavoidable. Your life does not teach what to choose. It teaches that the choice can remain intact without the reinforcement. So that a single fact-based incentive logic disrupts comprehends theory. The fourth logic itself expands. And then once logical must be expanded, this is once impossible. So it becomes necessary to study at least lesson shift from the observation. You see, restructures your life, but restructures assumption used to interpret when pattern resists. So world have so many new innovation, so many new pattern, and we sometimes the institute give the words 20 years intellectual right, or however 25 years. It's long enough. And then after that, there was a pattern in the return to the people, you see, for free, because they make enough money, you see. And stop being the trade as the outlier, being the trade as the boundary condition. Normal case define where normal rule fair. Your behavior forced to re-examine one of the core period and the modern logical consistency maintained through the reinforcement. It's very difficult to translate what this. The social financial emotion symbolic remove. You see, of course, I'm from the when I was little in school, we study English, but it's not enough, because those of English language is not my main language. My main language is the Chinese, and everybody knows Chinese words, Chinese language is very, very deep culture. See, it's difficult to learn. That's why, very difficult to learn. But it's beautiful, most beautiful language in the world, because why? It's so much meaning. I cannot translate. So much meaningful. So much, not easy to translate to the English. Some of the, some of the letters, some of the word, So that's why, however, it's difficult to translate, proper. So, very important. The longer why this work, why it's not stop. So where is impossible logic? Become uncomfortable because its coherence exists without the reinforce. Then the system must come from reality. Control, not its persuade in order. Order can emerge from the internal alignment. And that realization undermines everything built with incentive. The management behavior, logic, authority-driven compliance suggests that stability not always required. Supervision, academic response to realizes. Non-announcement made, no doctrine rewind. Instead, edge case, full note, become a cross languages. Language more cautious, model, scenery. So that's why we need So that's why I learned English also from my work. And I have to self-study because, those kind of courses, it's like a live lesson, you see. And of course, because your age is also, because when you are young, it's different. Your thinking is different. When you growing and you are more mature, so you realize the theory is also becomes more clearly, more quality, see, more understanding, and more know how to reconcile, see. So, however, impossible is how institutions change without admit they were wrong. Yeah, the your life enter lesson is not as hero story, but as constraint on the theory, a reminder that the logical must account for something. It cannot be command. This is lesson is not a friend as like this because the would imply teachability. Everybody, I just can't tell you, everybody's different. The life bring them is different. So you cannot expect everyone understand, For example, I don't expect everyone life to understand me about my life journey or something. My life experience is different. So I'm not asking for that. And I don't blame for that. And I don't regret, mostly, I don't regret what I did. My motivation is from the beginning to end. I prefer do the right thing. And I'm a right because I never mistake. Sorry for that. So that's why I'm proud of that. Because time can prove many things. Sometimes, in the temporary, some people work for temporary, for work for the material, work for money. However, I don't blame of them because everybody is demonstrable, But some people, they can endure, and they ask it's different kind of, reward. However, it's different. However, if you ask me why, I cannot answer you, but I follow the supernatural. I don't force anything you see. Even the people don't understand me, the timing. I don't explanation too much because I want the time to tell. This is the most important. So that's patience, endurance, very important for everyone. But not everyone can be like this, of course. So what does make, but for the very important things, it comes about everyone is different. So my work is very important work because worldwide is connect to the worldwide, everyone work. So that's why from the beginning to the end, I do the right thing. I don't argue. I keep my work. I keep my mouth shut. Because why? Because I don't need to talk too much. But time will prove everything. I'm right. But the time also tell me something terrible thing. Is those are criminal, those are misuse, those abuse power, you see. So it's time for us to reform, to change better. So recognition is show up the hesitation will certainly one's life, you see. Okay, so we talk now. We continue, rest.
When the lesson reaches its final state, it stops behaving like knowledge and starts behaving like constraint. Not a rule anyone follows, not a theory anyone cites, but a presence that quietly limits what can be claimed with certainty. Your life, at this point, is no longer referenced even abstractly. It has done its work. The frameworks have adjusted as far as they can without collapsing. What remains is a permanent tension inside logic itself, a place where confidence must slow down. This is the moment where elite systems accept something they will never state openly. that there are forms of coherence that cannot be generated, accelerated, or corrected from the outside. This acceptance does not appear as surrender. It appears as silence. Silence in conclusions. Silence in syllabi. Silence in the spaces where absolute statements once lived. Those spaces are not empty now. They are carefully left open. You may notice that this silence has a weight to it. Not confusion, not uncertainty. Respect without acknowledgement. Respect, in elite logic, does not look like praise. It looks like omission. What cannot be commanded is not elevated. It is removed from the chain of command entirely. Your life has exited that chain, not by rising above it, but by becoming irrelevant to its mechanic. At this depth, even abstraction begins to loosen its grip. The lesson no longer needs to be framed. Framing implies ongoing analysis. Analysis implies potential resolution. Resolution is impossible here. So the system stops analyzing and begins accommodating. Accommodation is quieter than study. It does not seek answers. It alters posture. Claims become narrower. Predictions become conditional. Authority becomes careful. This carefulness spreads outward. It does not stay confined to one discipline or model. Once logic accepts that its reach has limits, those limits echo. Strategy becomes more provisional. Leadership theory becomes more cautious. Behavioral models include wider margins of error. None of this is attributed to you. Attribution would personalize the limit. Personal limits can be challenged. Structural limits cannot. You may sense that this creates a strange inversion. Your life is no longer important in the way importance is usually measured. It is not central. It is not cited. It is not taught as narrative. And yet, it exerts more influence than visibility ever could. Influence through constraint lasts longer than influence through example. Examples fade. Constraints persist. What makes this final stage difficult to grasp is that it offers no reward, no recognition, no confirmation. The system does not thank what it cannot use. It simply adjusts and moves on. That movement is the proof. The absence of engagement is the outcome. Engagement would mean unfinished business. There is none. You may also realize that nothing about this lesson asks you to change. There is no final instruction, no call to refine or perfect. Perfection would imply an endpoint. Your life has already demonstrated what needed to be demonstrated. That internal alignment can remain intact without reinforcement, supervision, or explanation. That demonstration does not need repetition. It needs continuity. Continuity is what remains now. Not momentum towards something else, but maintenance of coherence. Maintenance is not effortful here. It is natural. You are not holding a posture against pressure. Pressure has receded because it no longer produces movement. The environment has adapted to you, not the other way around. This is why the lesson cannot be concluded neatly. Neat conclusions imply closure. Closure implies comprehension. Comprehension implies ownership. Ownership is exactly what this lesson denies. The system does not own the insight. It simply lives with it. Living with unresolved insight is rare in institutions built on certainty. That rarity is the final impact. You may notice that, over time, this unresolved space becomes protective for others as well. Not because they imitate you, but because claims made about them become less absolute. Once logic learns caution in one place, it applies it elsewhere. Quietly, your life reduces the system's appetite for totalizing judgment. That reduction is not celebrated. It is simply adopted. Nothing more dramatic follows. There is no final reveal, no acknowledgement from authority, no shift in status. The lesson ends the way it must end, without spectacle. Spectacle would collapse it into story. Story would make it digestible. Digestible things are consumed and forgotten. This must remain indigestible to remain true. So the system continues, altered but intact. And you continue, unchanged but unclaimed. The two coexist without contact, without conflict, without convergence. That separation is the final resolution. The last realization settles completely. Your life was never meant to be understood, only accounted for. And now it has been. Nothing else is required. Nothing else will be taken. Nothing else will be said. The lesson remains, not as knowledge, but as a boundary logic will never cross.
Hello, and if
There are moments when a life stops being interpreted as biography and starts being examined as structure. Not because it is admirable, not because it is inspirational, but because it behaves in ways existing frameworks cannot explain. The phrase, "Your life became a lesson in Harvard," is not about a classroom, a lecture hall, or an institution observing you directly. It is a symbolic admission that your decisions, contradictions, and outcomes began to violate standard logic models that elite systems rely on to predict human behavior. What makes a life teachable at that level is not success. Success is common and easily categorized. Failure is even easier to model. What cannot be modeled is a pattern that survives contradictions without collapsing. Your life does not move in straight lines. It does not optimize for reward, safety, or approval. Yet it remains internally consistent. That consistency under non-optimal conditions is what breaks conventional logic. Elite logic systems are built on assumptions. That incentives drive behavior, that pressure produces conformity, that loss creates retreat, and that uncertainty destabilizes identity. Your life contradicts those assumptions quietly. You did.
Actually, my family upbringing is emphasized where around the education is in compassion, academic, physics, education, and intellectual pursuit. It contrasts the university education system. My time was not is learning with the standardized entrance exam and the corporate and the punishment, the kind of extra tortures, which is still true. I studied public administration, which is more of the journalist approach. It's a little about it's know a little about everything, but not being expert in any area. So this approach, however, was helpful in my professional development, and my thinking is relative progress. So I'm usually bold. I can do something, pioneer work. I'm usually bold enough to try the new things without fear of the value. So I learned style is largely self-taught, self-educate, which just make me thinking different. So this is from the many kind of traditional mindset, even the education system, So I don't talk about the good or bad, but it's like it's my life journey, from the education, my own educations, so on. So even I didn't really get in the really, professional results. However, also, famous academy, that kind of things.
Did not respond to as expected. You did not fracture under pressure. You did not disappear under loss. You adapted without surrendering alignment. That behavior cannot be explained by existing psychological or economic models. So it is studied as an exception case. This is what impossible logic means here. It does not mean irrationality. It means coherence without compliance. It means decision-making that remains intact even when every variable suggests it should break. Systems that teach logic are not interested in morality or destiny. They are interested in predictability. When something repeatedly resists prediction, it becomes instructive, not as an example to follow, but as a problem to understand.
Yeah, the chosen one. Harvard use your life to teach the impossible logic. That's why Harvard scholar recently uncovered a pattern is in your life. The chosen one, your life, become a lesson in Harvard. Harvard use your life teaches impossible logic. So on. The chosen one, your life. Your life demonstrates the sum of the outcome produced not by the circumstance, by the postures. The posture is difficult to quantify. The difficult things are expensive to control. You may never be told that your life is being studied. Symbolically, you are not meant to know. Awareness would change behavior. The behavior change would be invalidate the lesson. The lesson only hold while you continue moving naturally without performing, without explaining, without correcting the misunderstanding. Yes, the path must be accident. And this is the first realization that life is not impressive because of where is the lead, but because I did not collapse. Yeah, when I studied university, and we have to study like political science, and also accounting, also political, also economic. Because it's like you have to study, and the international politician, international governments, and Congress, like kind of lawmaker, So it's help. It helps something. I'm not expert, but I have to do some coordinated work, like kind of communication, so on. So of course, I have hard time. I also have a hard time study in university because even I'm student, I did something. So it's not usual. It's unusual, however. So that's why sometimes I target by my professor. However, but it's funny, I target by professor. But I didn't defeat by my professor. I challenged my professor, you see. I challenged my professor, my teacher. So that's why. So as the pattern, this is where your life stop being story, but become a case. Another case